Hey Vinyl community, happy Sunday. Today I'm going to be jumping on a contest for my very good friend in the VC, Chris Propfe. He's just having a contest for the heck of it because he wants to show appreciation and love for the vinyl community. And I am more than happy to participate. Chris, as you know, has appeared regularly on our Four Horsemen Thursday discussions that we have had. And personally, for me, Chris Propfe was one of the vinyl community members who actually inspired me to start making videos. And I still look up to his channel quite a bit. I aspire to be as eloquent, as verbose, as just naturally comfortable in front of the camera as Chris. And also, I wish my vinyl collection was 1/4 as cool as Chris's collection is. So if you have not checked out Chris Propfe's channel, and I don't know how you couldn't have, because I consider Chris to be the elder statesman of the VC, and I don't mean that because of his age. I'm actually a few years older than Chris, so it's not anything to say about his age. I am just saying Chris Propfe, if they were to do a Mount Rushmore, Chris Propfe would be one of the sculpted heads. And I am not being funny about that. I am genuinely serious. I know many people who consider Chris Propfe to be one of the greatest contributors to the vinyl community. And he's inspired a lot of people who are now members of the VC. So anyway, before I go too much on about Chris, I want to get into his contest questions. Now, number one is he wants us to show an album from the year he was born, 1974. And so I am So question number one, he wants us to show an album from the year 1974, which is the year he was born. I am going to show Venus and Mars, and I think I've just got Paul McCartney kind of rolling around in my head. I've been watching the 3-2-1 documentary on Hulu where Paul talks with Rick Rubin. But this was the only Beatles-related album that my dad owned. He was not a Beatles fan. I think it was overexposure on the radio when he was growing up. And so I got into the Beatles when I was younger, and I would always play this album because it was the only Beatles-related record that we had in our house. And I still think it holds up really well today. This was the studio follow-up to Band on the Run. Never been crazy about the production. I think there's just a weird production quality to it. And I think the music, in some cases, is done a disservice. I think the drums are mixed very weird and very low. But the songs, I think, are solid all the way through. You have the Venus and Mars, which is kind of the opening. It's not even really a full song. It's just sort of the lead into Rock Show. You've got Love and Song, which is a great ballad. You Gave Me the Answer, which is almost a When I'm 64. And I've always made the comparison that I think Paul maybe subconsciously was drawing on a lot of Sgt. Pepper imagery and just the whole feel of Sgt. Pepper, the whole structure of Sgt. Pepper for this album, because you've got a song, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, that opens that album, and then the segue right into With a Little Help from My Friends. Well, and here you've got Venus and Mars, and that segue right into Rock Show. You've got kind of an older type, I don't know, you're gonna call it like a dance hall type tune, Tin Pan Alley, if you will, with You Gave Me the Answer on here, which is sort of the answer to When I'm 64. The color scheme on here is very similar to Sgt. Pepper. You got the red and the yellow. This opens up into a gatefold. There's quite a few comparisons. I did a video on this when I did my Venus and Mars collection, why I think that this is so very closely related to Sgt. Pepper. You've got a reprise of the title track on side 2, another comparison, but anyway, nonetheless, won't go too much into this record, but I adore this record. I like it, and one of my favorite McCartney records. Then Chris wants us to show us question number 2. Chris wants us to show an album from 1988. So I am going to show Green by REM. Might be my favorite REM album. For the first time, you're hearing the mandolin on here that Peter Buck was starting to get into. You'd hear a little bit more of it on Out of Time. But I love this. I love it from the opening track, Pop Song 89. Then Get Up, I think, is one of my favorite number 2 tracks of all time. Yeah, and you've got, I mean, Stand, which some people think is a little too uber poppy compared to stuff that REM had done in the past. In Orange Crush, which there was a video for and I heard on the radio, but I think it's really good. I think it was a move into a more mature direction from Document, which was a great album. And I think this is really the last album from REM's classic period. This was the first album for Warner Brothers after they left IRS Records. So they were now on a major label, and there were a lot of expectations that came with that. Document had been their breakout album because The One I Love was such a monster hit. And I think they showed that they could still put out a solid album with this one. So very cool. Now he wants us to show, for question number 3, 3 albums that were very important to us. Speaking of Sgt. Pepper, this is the purple label copy. I've got like 8 copies of Sgt. Pepper, but I picked this one because this was the first one that I ever owned. It's on the purple capital label. But the reason this is important to me is, I had mentioned before, we didn't have any Beatle records in our house. My parents were not Beatles fan. Not that they didn't like the Beatles, but they didn't own any Beatle records because they liked a lot of other artists better, and they heard the Beatles. You could turn on the radio and always hear the Beatles, so they just didn't own it. They didn't own any of their records. And so when I got old enough and started to appreciate the Beatles, if I wanted to have any Beatle records, I would have to go out and buy them myself with my own money, or get them for Christmas or my birthday. So I remember going to Kmart, which was the local discount retail store in our neighborhood, and the first Beatles studio album that wasn't a greatest hits was Sgt. Pepper, and I bought it because there was so much to look at the cover. The only songs I was familiar with on here were Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and With a Little Help from My Friends. I hadn't even really heard Sgt. Pepper that much on the radio, and so I remember I bought this, and it was a Saturday, bought it in the morning and took it home. And that entire day, it was a rainy day, I just sat and I listened to this. Side 1, flipped it over. Side 2, flipped it back over. Side 1, side 2. I must have played it, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 8 times that day. And looking at the artwork, opening it up, and looking at the gatefold, how interesting that was. Reading along with the lyrics. And then there was this interesting thing, which I'd never seen before. You had a cutout insert that came with it. Didn't cut any of it out because I wasn't going to go around wearing the mustache or the badges, but and I think most people didn't actually cut them out. I think they just saw it as kind of a cool little insert that you got as part of the record. But it was just, back, not to get all nostalgic, but back in those days, I used to just sit in my room on my bed and listen to records and look at the artwork and read the lyrics and just kind of soak in. It was all the whole package. You couldn't separate the music from the album artwork. But that was very first Beatles studio album that I ever bought with my own money. Second album that I'm going to show, this is the Smiths' Hatful of Hollow. This was their second album, technically, released in the UK. It was released a bit later in the US. This actually came out before the Meat is Murder album, but this is essentially a compilation of some of their BBC recordings with a few singles, I think sprinkled here and there, but primarily this is their John Peel sessions and I think another BBC session that they had done. But this was my first exposure to anything outside of mainstream rock and roll. And we're talking Boston, we're talking Journey, we're talking Foreigner, Fleetwood Mac, all the stuff that my dad used to listen to, Jay Giles Band. Because, again, I couldn't afford really a whole lot of music on my own. And any time that I could afford a record, because I was such a huge Beatles fan, I was going out and I was spending money buying Beatle records. And so I would listen to a lot of my dad's collection, or there'd be hand-me-down records that somebody didn't want anymore. So that's how I got the Best of the Bee Gees. Somebody gifted, they kind of just said, hey, I know you're listening to records, you can have this. First Boston record I got that way. I got Jay Giles' Greatest Hits because somebody didn't want it anymore. So I was getting a lot of those records. And I had never experienced anything that you might call new wave or alternative until I got into high school. And in one of my classes, there were a few skateboard kids who were into punk rock. They were into alternative music. And they let me borrow this album so I could go home and tape it. And then I just brought it back the next day. But I'm like, the Smiths. And I was intrigued by the cover. I'd never heard anything, never heard of the Smiths, number one. Number two, I was like, what is going on with this cover and some of these song titles? William, It Was Really Nothing. Please, please, please let me get what I want. Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now. I mean, I'd never heard, Boston wasn't coming out with these mopey, interesting song titles. You know, you never heard a song like, What Difference Does It Make? Or This Night Has Opened My Eyes on a Foreigner album. You know, Fleetwood Mac wasn't singing Reel Around the Fountain. So it was just interesting. And I remember taking it home and like, expecting it was going to be very abrasive, very I hadn't heard a whole lot of punk, so I just imagined punk being unlistenable music in my, 16-year-old ears, because I just hadn't been exposed to it. But I love that this is very much pop music, but with alternative song lyrics. Johnny Marr, I think, is one of the, he's definitely one of the greatest guitarists of the 1980s. He's got such a soft tone to a lot of the guitar playing that he does. He certainly he can play aggressive when he needs to, but just beautiful guitar playing. You just love listening to how his guitar sounds on each song. I'd never heard a singer like Morrissey before, and that's one of the things. If people don't like the Smiths, it's usually because they don't care for Morrissey's voice. He's got just a very melodramatic, some might say effeminate in places, but kind of nasally a bit. And so if you're not used to it, I can see how it could kind of be off-putting. But I'm a huge Smiths fan, huge Morrissey fan. I think Morrissey's lyrics are very, and sometimes sarcastic, ironic. He's poking fun at certain elements of, British society, and it's a very British album in a way, or a lot of the songs that the Smiths were doing were very British, but I think they're also universal in another way. A lot of it is unrequited love and nobody's ever gonna love me, and it's mopey kind of themes that people think like depressing, or just in some cases, some people find it difficult to relate to. But I am going on record as saying I am a huge Smiths fan, always have been since the first spin of that record, and continue to be to this day. So the third record that I am going to show, and I'm sorry this video is going on long, I didn't realize I was going to be talking so much, but the third important album to me that I'm going to show is going to be Black Celebration by Depeche Mode. And I first heard this album when I was I think I was a senior in high school. I had just started getting into Depeche Mode, and I had a group of friends who we used to hang out every weekend, and they were into alternative, which was alternative music at that time. So some Depeche Mode, some U2, which was considered alternative at that time, New Order, Violent Femmes, those kind of bands. And there was a girl, and she was a year older than I was. She had graduated. I was a senior in high school, and she had graduated and then was attending Eastern Michigan University for her freshman year. And during the beginning part of her freshman year, like in the fall, she found out that she had cancer, and it was skin cancer, and it spread very, very quickly. It started attacking her other organs. She never got to finish her first year of college out, and she ended up passing away. Actually, it was very quickly, like that winter of, this would have been probably like 1987 or 88. I don't remember. It was a while ago. And I just remember being very shocked and devastated. She was only 19 at the time. And a good friend of mine had just passed away. And I thought, how could that happen? Like, that's impossible. When you're that young, things like that don't happen to you. And it was a very much a life-changing, it just kind of, I mean, my dad had passed away a couple of years before, but I mean, in my mind, even though he was only 37 years old, I thought, well, he was older, that happens. And then when this happened to a friend of mine, I'm like, wow, it just totally, kind of upset my world and how I thought things, were supposed to happen. But anyway, as I was kind of processing that grief, one of the albums that I kept turning to was Black Celebration, particularly side 2. Side 2 tends to be a little bit more of the darker. It's my favorite side on this particular record, but it's got some more darker themes. And I just remember, being at the funeral home and then the drive home, listening to side 2. It was a cassette at the time, but listening to this on the ride home, and just, it just felt like, it sounded like what I was feeling at the time and what I was going through. And so even now when I listen to this record, it kind of takes me back to that period of time, the thoughts that I was having and things that I was going through. So always had a real connection to this album, which, Depeche Mode have been really considered synth pop, somewhat new wave-ish synth pop. But after this was their first really true, I think, mature album. And hard to really label this kind of synth pop because it is more mature, it's more alternative than what they had put out before. Okay, so what question are we on now? Question number 4 is, show us your inner or outer sleeves. Well, outer sleeves, I've got 2 different kinds of outer sleeves, and I don't really know the brand or the manufacturer, but been using more the 2 mil sleeve, which is a little more transparent. It's not as thick as the other sleeve that I use, which is the 3 mil. I haven't quite graduated to the 4 mil, just because when I go to 4 mil, I want to be all in. I want to be putting all my favorite records in there, and it's a little outside my price range to invest in that many sleeves for the records that I have. So I've just been kind of sticking with mostly the 2 mil, and then I've got some that are the 3 mil. I don't remember the exact manufacturer on that. And then for my inner sleeves, I do kind of a do-it-your DIY inner sleeve for mine. So what I tend to use is I like using this, and it's I wrap it. It's not so much a sleeve as I wrap, and this is real thick. It's almost it's like plastic wrap type thing. So it's not so much a sleeve, but what I will do is I take the record and then I will just wrap it. I'm doing this real sloppy now. I take more care and precision with it when when I have a new record and I'm putting it in the sleeve. But, you know, I just kind of wrap it like this. And then it snugly fits the record, which is what I like about it. It's very protected. You can mold it to fit the shape of the record. And then, you know, I just pop it right in the old sleeve there, rip it out. Like I say, I'm just trying to do this real quick for the camera. So, but works very well for me. You can pick this as like $3 at the grocery store, which I like too. You're not spending a lot of money on expensive inner sleeves. So last question is, how long have you been in the VC? For me, it's probably been about 1.5 years. I would say it was probably like the winter of, I don't know, early 2000 when I started making, no, I'm sorry, early 2020 when I started making videos. So, yeah, been about 1.5 years, give or take a couple of months. So, all right, Chris, I hope you get a lot of participation. I know you'll get a lot of participation in your contest. I'm sorry mine's so long. It's Sunday morning and nobody's up yet, so I have the house to myself to make a video. But everybody take care and have a great weekend.